What is going on YouTube? It is Primitive here, and today I'm going to be bringing you my Nocturne Teemo decklist profile that I've been using at locals this past week. I was able to win a locals, and then I went X1 at another locals a couple days ago, and then last night went 3-0 as well. So I've been doing pretty well with this list. I have been tweaking it quite a bit, and I still think I will probably improve upon it, but I do think this is a pretty solid list that I'm at right now. And so with that being said, let's just go ahead and get on the list, start talking about it. So getting on into the battlefields, we'll start off with Bandletree. We are playing a ton of hidden cards, 10 or 11 I believe, so being able to hide 2 at one battlefield is really nice to be able to do things like hide a defensive card like a purple Teemo or a fighter flight, and then also be able to hide Consult the Past so that way you can draw cards while also play defensive. It's just a really strong card, and it's something that your opponent's not really going to be able to take advantage of too often because there's not a ton of hidden cards in other decks, and usually they're not going to have 2 hidden cards in hand to be able to hide at the same battlefield, so generally you're going to get a ton of value out of it and your opponent will get none. Then we have Zon Warrens. We are playing 3 Mundos in here, so being able to get your discard bigger is better. But also just the early game cycle is very nice, regardless of if you're buffing your Mundo or not. I just want to see those consistency cards. We aren't playing Traveling Merchant, as we will see, so having that little extra draw is always nice. And then to finish it off, we'll have Grove. This is a hold deck you want to be holding, and you could go for the Star Tip Peak, which gets you more runes, but generally a lot of the times I just want to see my key pieces that I need, so I like the Grove a little bit more, but that is going to be it for the battlefields. So now getting on into the main deck, let's start off with talking about the 3 Nocturne. When you look at cards from your main deck but you don't draw them and you see Nocturne, you can play it by paying 1 power cost, which is why we have the Teemo Strategist as our chosen champion to start off with, because when this defends, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, you deal 1 damage to a unit for every card with hidden that you reveal. But if you find Nocturne in there, you can also play Nocturne, so this is really good for defensive plays, being able to defend with Teemo, maybe deal 2 damage to a unit, find a Nocturne, which then you can play into the battlefield or you can play into base for next turn. It's very strong, but you can also take advantage of Nocturne with another strong card. Stack deck. Stack deck, you look at your top 3, you get to pick a card, put it in your hand, and put the rest to the bottom. However, if you see a Nocturne in there, you can not only get a card to your hand, but you can play a Nocturne, and you'll definitely have at least 1 rune tap since you're playing the stack deck to be able to cycle it. So this package does feel very strong. We do have one other card that is my Traveling Merchant replacement that can get Nocturne, the Mystic Poro. Now, this card is kind of a high roll if you hit Nocturne, but that's not necessarily the point. I do like the Mystic Poro being able to just have the vision to just choose what you're going to draw next turn, whether you look at it, okay, this is good for next turn, this is bad for next turn. But with the vision, if you do high roll and hit the Nocturne, it is very nice. But this is basically the small little Nocturne package. However, it is fairly consistent, but we can go ahead and start talking about the rest of the deck now. So we'll start off with the units. We have 3 Ravenbloom Student, just the best 2-drop in the game. Very strong, especially when you're playing blue-purple. You have access to a ton of 1 to 2 cost options. That can buff this up, so it's just really good in the early game. We're going to have 2 Teemo Scout. This card, I think, is generally a little bit better than the Teemo Strategist if you don't have Nocturnes, but I still think this card coming out of Hidden and having this as an option to come out of Hidden or bounce with the Teemo hero is really strong, so I still play 2 Teemo Scout, and then versus some matchups like the Aurora or whatever, if you want to swap out your chosen champion between game 2 and 3 for this Teemo, you can, but generally I just think this card is a very strong hitting card, and there's no reason to not play it, even if it's not going to be our chosen champion. Then we have 2 Tide Turner, also a generally strong hitting card, being able to swap with things like Ember Monk and Mundo to hold better, but also it is kind of a pseudo fighter flight because you can play this, swap with one of your ready units at a battlefield, like a Mundo, let's say. Then you can bring the Mundo back and then move it over, so that way you don't have to use Ride the Winds. It's like kind of a pseudo Ride the Winds, but this card is just very strong. Being a 2-drop that doesn't cost power is very good for consistency, but also being just that Mundo Ember Monk mover arounder, very strong. Then we have 3 Ember Monk. When you play a card from Hidden, give this +2. This is kind of your ultimate holder because you a lot of the times aren't going to play Mundo till a little bit later in the game, so your deck is generally trying to take advantage of Ember Monk while spamming out Nocturnes if possible. So that's going to be your general early to mid game plan is just get 1 to 2 Ember Monks out and then try to conquer both, so that way you can hide 2 cards, potentially buff this up to 8, use Tide Turner to swap around and get the damage going and whatnot. So Ember Monk is super strong. Then we got 2,000 Tailed Watcher. Not too much to say about this. You have a lot of ways to move things and remove things off of battlefields, like with the fighter flights. You have Dr. Mundo. You have these Ember Monks that you can get really big. So I don't think you necessarily need to play 3,000 Tailed Watchers. You could, but I just went down to 2 for deck space because I think that's pretty consistent, because with the stack decks, with the draws, you're going to be going through so many cards that 2 is fine. You really only need 1 a game. It's not a deck that feels like it's super dependent on Watcher. And then we have 3 Dr. Mundo, which is just kind of our game ender, pairing this with Ride the Winds, Tide Turner, whatever, just conquering a battlefield, putting it in there, holding. This card is super good. Played it at 3 because I was playing a 2-2 split for a while, and I just kept having games versus Kaisa where I just wouldn't find my Mundo until 1 to 2 turns too late. So I just went up to 3 for consistency, because Kaisa's going to be everywhere, so I just want to be main boarded for Kaisa essentially, so I went back up to 3. But that is going to be the rest of the units in the list. So now getting to the spells, we have 3 Gust, just generally strong removal in the early game, being able to bounce things like Raven Blooms, Poros, Watchful Sentry, anything. It's just very strong. And then pairing this with the stack decks we looked at earlier, you have some decent 1-drops to be able to fill out Curve, or be able to buff up your Raven Blooms in the early game. I am not playing Stupefy, which is a card that you could put into this list, but I just didn't find the space for it. But it does generally make Gust a little bit better if you have Stupefy, because then you can make things like Kaisa or Noxus Hopeful a 3-might and then bounce it with Gust. So if you do want to fit Stupefy into your list, it is something that you could, and it would be very fairly strong. Then I have 3 Fighter Flight, one of the best hitting cards in my opinion, because it's just so good for defensive plays, and so this is just kind of the auto 3 of, along with Consult the Past in Teemo. 2 Ride the Winds to move around our Ember Monks and move around our Dr. Mundo, get that end game, and then also it has a pseudo removal effect where you can move one of your units to a battlefield, even if you're not going to try to conquer, but just try to trade with a unit or something like that. Ride the Winds is just incredibly powerful, so I think it's good at 2. I think 3 might be a little too much. They have 1 Invert Timelines. I think this card is very good in Mundo list. It's not super crazy, but being able to just refresh your hand if you have awkward hands and need to find those cards to be able to get onto battlefield so you can start hiding cards or find hitting cards when you're at a battlefield. I think Invert Timelines is pretty good. Especially if you get into matchups like versus Time Warp decks, and if they just like seem like they're holding on to a couple cards, being able to pop this and be able to try to get rid of something like a Time Warp or whatever is very nice. But for the most part, it's just a decent consistency card. 3 Consult the Past, which I'm a big fan of. One of the other better hitting cards with Fighter Flight, because you just get to draw so much with this, and being able to buff up your Raven Blooms and your Ember Monks while also being able to draw cards is just insane defensive value. Then to finish off these spells, we have the 2 Singularity for just general removal. Being able to hit things in base is highly important to me, so I think this is better than like Falling Comet or Riptide Rex, just for the fact that I can hit something at a battlefield and base, or both battlefields, or 2 things at base. The flexibility for it is very nice, and it is very high on power, but we are also playing 2 Seal of Insight to finish off the 40 main board. So that's what we're looking at for the main deck. We'll go over the runes really quick, and then we'll get into the sideboard. So just to quickly go over the runes, we have 8 blue and 4 purple. Now, you really only have the Ride the Winds and the Invert Timelines in the main deck that would be, like, needing the purple, so you could go for, like, a 9-3 split. However, as we're about to go over in the sideboard, it has a bit more purple power cost, so I wanted to just keep it at 4, so that way, once we go into post board, I have just the amount of purple runes that I need. And also, for the most part, you never really don't have blue runes, so there's no real reason to go above 8 or 4, so I think this is just a good split here. So now for the sideboard, it is fairly simple. We have 3 fading memories. This is for Aurora decks. You can pop the gear, you can pop big bodies. So it's also good versus Ramp Yi. It can be good versus Ari. Obviously, they can be defied versus some decks. But for the most part, I am more worried about MF Aurora than anything. So being able to just have something that can either pop Aurora or pop the giant Volley Bear is very nice. So just played this at 3, and then I also have 2 Rebuke, which is helpful versus similarly all those matchups as well. However, this also helps versus things like Set. I like being able to just have action speed bouncing, so that way once I go into a showdown, whether they do something like play a Dead Bloom in an Aurora deck, so that way I want to hold, or they play Set, they spend as buff, they come in big. Rebuke, being able to play during the showdown is very nice, opposed to Fading Memories can only be played during my main phase. And then to finish off the board, we have 3 Smokescreen, which is mainly for decks like Set and Ari. Just being able to have general -4 can be really good. I think this card can be sided into generally a lot of matchups. However, I just don't really like it into Kaisa, and it's not incredibly necessary versus Aurora decks either. So I didn't want it in my main board, but versus things like maybe Hook Darius or Set, I think Smokescreen will be very good, as well as like Ari, Ramp Yi. I think all these cards are just very good into the general weaknesses of the deck. So with that being said, that is the list. I hope you all have been having a great time with Riftbound. I am just getting a new microphone and a new laptop recently, so I should be able to be pumping out much more content here soon, and I will see you all at the future events and catch you next time. Peace.